Hey, welcome to the Gig Life Podcast. I'm your host, Stevie Taylor. This is episode 103. Jim Kelly. Here we go. My guest today is Australian guitar legend, educator and studio owner, Jim Kelly. Jim has firmly established himself as a leading Australian contemporary jazz and blues guitarist, composer and educator, whose reputation goes well beyond Australian shores. In 1975, Jim co-formed Crossfire, Australia's most celebrated jazz fusion group. From 1975 to 1987, Jim perfected the rigorous demands of the recording studio and became a highly sought-after session player, performing on countless jingles, documentaries, film scores, plus pop and jazz artists' albums. Jim also performed and recorded with Australian artists Kerry Bedell, Renee Gayer, Johnny Farnham, Debbie Byrne, John English, Tommy Emmanuel, Erina Clark, Don Burrows, James Muller and Dale Barlow, just to name a few. The 90s saw a change of lifestyle for Jim, with a move to northern New South Wales to lecture at the Southern Cross University in Lismore, where he was head of guitar studies for 17 years. Jim has since resigned from full-time academia and now runs a recording studio from his home, Tone Ranger Studios. He's produced many fine albums and has quickly achieved the reputation of becoming a world-class producer and mixing mastering engineer. Jim is a musician dedicated to the art of improvising, composing, performing and teaching, and is always searching for new ways to expand his musical horizons. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please give it up for Mr. Jim Kelly. I think we're rolling. Jim Kelly, welcome to the Gig Life Podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is I don't do too many of these things, but when I get asked, I always say yes. I enjoy it.
Great, and I'm honoured to have you on the show, Jim. I've wanted to have you on the show for quite a while, but I didn't quite know how to get hold of you. And Dave Sanders sent me a message on Instagram and said, "Hey, you need to talk to Jim Kelly." And I said, "Yeah, I know, but I don't know how to get hold of him." So
I hope Dave was right.
Dave connected us via email, and here we are. And it's
great.
Yeah, it's taken us 4 shots at this.
It has.
The first time my kids and my wife got sick, so I had to look after them.
Yeah.
The second week, you got sick.
Yeah.
You got tinnitus in your ears.
Yeah.
Last week we had a local bushfire not far up here, and it took out all the internet.
Yeah.
So so that was week 3, and then here we are today.
Great.
so fingers crossed we keep.
Aren't we tenacious?
Oh, totally. It's the way. Now I just want to mention, I've been communicating via email with your manager, which is your lovely wife Jules.
Yep. Yeah, she does all that for me.
Yep. And you guys were just away in Queensland last week, and she said in her email that as you guys got home, there was a python cruising in through the cat flap.
It was, yeah. Yeah, the timing was perfect. Its head was just coming through, and it was having a look around as we walked in, you know. So, it wasn't too much of it. We're used to them, by the way.
Oh, really? No, and, you can have that.
There's hardly a house up in this area that doesn't have a resident python or carpet snake living in the roof, you know.
Oh, wow, stuff that.
But you may not see them for years,
right.
You know.
It's still there.
And then all of a sudden you see them, you know.
Yeah. See, being from New Zealand myself, there's no snakes, there's no spiders.
No.
And like I've been in Australia for a while now, and I would say down here in Sydney I've seen maybe 2 snakes, if that.
Yep.
And that's 2's enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's enough for me.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those aversion things. I mean, some people at spiders or snakes or both or whatever. I'm not that keen on spiders, but snakes don't somehow, I don't know. They don't bother me.
Right. Yeah. Right. Now, how have you guys fared through the whole COVID thing? Let's talk a little bit about that.
It's almost, I almost feel embarrassed to say this because of my change of lifestyle, what I'm doing in music these days. It actually hasn't affected me at all. Mm-hmm. If anything, it may have made me gather slightly a little bit more work because I picked up a few more buddies and people that needed my services because the COVID was affecting them, and they started to record more at home and then would ask me to mix things, et cetera, and so on. Mm-hmm. So I'm reluctant to say it, but I'm pleased for my little business here. COVID actually didn't touch me, you know.
That's good. And we're talking about your recording studio, which is Tone Ranger Studios, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that a bit later if that's cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'd like to.
Yeah, cool. Don't be embarrassed that it didn't affect you. Like, I mean,
it's just there's so many mates that have done it really. I mean, I've heard like from really tough to not being affected to actually some people saying it actually worked in their favour in some sort of weird way. So it's a bit of a rainbow of depending on what you were doing and what luck you had in the way things moved around, you know, because of it.
All right. Well, let's roll it right back now. Right back to the beginning.
Sure.
So where were you born?
I was born in Sydney, 1950.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're from Northern Beaches, is that right?
Yeah, my childhood was pretty much between earlier days like Narrabeen, and then most of my childhood, younger years, and then into the teenage years was spent living in DY. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, was there music in the family? Were your parents musicians, and do you have siblings?
This is a total black sheep.
Okay.
Absolute. It sort of came from nowhere. That's one of those things I've thought about that the older I've got. From that angle, it came from nowhere, but there was an influence. Anyway, ask me more and we'll get to that influence because you may have some questions.
Yeah, for sure.
At this point.
Yep. So now, in saying that you're the black sheep, were your parents still listening to music? Was there still were they still listening to records and stuff like that? And were you starting to, get a bit of vibe into music, or did you get that somewhere else?
Well, this is where I can bring this story up.
Yep.
My parents, they liked to party, and we had not a double garage, but a big garage, and it was done up in a festive kind of party way with Casper the friendly ghost painted on the wall and stuff that me and my sister did because we were okay at drawing and all that sort of thing. And so there were often parties would erupt in the garage for the neighbours predominantly. And we were lucky enough to have a guy that lived opposite us in the suburban street of DY. It was called Wadden Avenue, by the way, for those enthusiasts about that sort of thing. His name was Mervyn Chambers, and when I was, like 8, 9, he was already, he would have been in his 50s, and he was a very interesting man. He worked from home, so he didn't go to work, which is pretty unusual for that kind of society back in those days. He was kind of a thinker, an inventor. He was an artist. He used to paint, and he still played the banjo, and he used to play with Ray Price, one of the early trad band characters of Sydney. He used to play with Ray Price, so he'd had a kind of a colourful life, if you like. Mm-hmm. So we all liked him because he was different, and he smoked a pipe. Mm-hmm. And he was a large man. He was a different individual. Anyway, at the parties that we had, which we had many, yes, there was always the 45s records were going onto the little the little player, and it was always Roy Orbison and Elvis Presley and songs of the day, hits of the day, and Bobby Darin, etc., and so on. And people would dance to the music, and they'd drink lots of beer and carry on. And I watched the whole party go on, and as kids, you loved it because could be mischievous and everything while the party was going on. But at one point in the party, Merv Chambers, Mr. Chambers to me, invariably would dispatch me over the road to go and get his banjo. So I put the banjo in his hands, and then he'd start playing tunes. And he played in the he didn't do the Earl Scruggs finger picking style stuff. He played the strumming one, just like that rhythmic. But he could play melodies and play tunes like Bye Bye Blackbird and all songs of the day, really, I guess, The minute he played, the party really would take off. And that's what I remember. That's where I noticed. I didn't notice then, but in hindsight, I went, oh, that was me witnessing the power of music, what it did to people.
Yeah, yeah.
And I loved it too. I was transfixed. And I was always at him, when he was at these parties going, Mr. Chambers, can I go and get the banjo now? And he'd say, no, not now, James, because everybody called me James back then. He'd say, no, not now, James, I'm not ready. And now I know what that meant. He just had to have more beer and whatever. So there'd come the point where I'd happily run over and get the banjo and then watch the party really change. Yeah. So I think that's kind of where the very first seeds of the love of music came into me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So when was the moment that you decided that you wanted to play an instrument? And were you thinking banjo there, or did you or did you hear something else, a guitarist or something?
I always loved talking to a comedian. No. Okay, there's a little bit to this. There's another add-on to this story.
Cool.
On the other corner, opposite our house, because we lived on a corner, so one of the other houses looking into ours, there was a kid about my age. Gee, this is going to be funny if he's actually hears this one day, about my age. And he was one of those, they had a brick home, we had a fibro home. Mm-hmm. In other words, they were better placed, financially. His train set was bigger than mine. His bike was better than mine. Everything that he ever had, and apparently he did better at school than I could do. And
that guy,
he's one of those guys,
yep.
So, but I used to hang out with him because I like playing with his big train set and all that sort of stuff. Yep. Anyway, his parents got him a ukulele for one of his birthdays at about the age, because I took it up when I was about 12 or 13, around about there. And they were kind of having a little bit of a gloat to my parents about how good he was. He was really, coming on quickly on the ukulele. And I just went, because I love music, I said to my mum, I said, when it's my birthday, can you get me a ukulele? I reckon I can play it better than Alan. His name was Alan. So I reckon I could play it better than him. Maybe there's something I can do that's better than what he's up to. And anyway, they did get me the ukulele, and I kind of went whoosh, And Merv Chambers, because he played banjo, he could play ukulele, of course, like everybody that plays the guitar can play the uke and all that, all that sort of follow on. And he showed me a couple of chords, and off I went. And then after a couple of weeks, he said to my mum one day, he said, James has got a bit of a talent for this. He's learning really quickly. He's got good hands. Then I said to my mum, well, can I want an acoustic guitar. I want to go to the guitar. So then went to the guitar. And then after that, I went to the electric. And then I started listening to the Shadows, and it sort of went whoosh from that point on. And I've got a little story about the Shadows too, by the way. Right. But that's what did it. Yeah. Right.
You would have obviously heard in Harry Bruce's podcast that we did that Hank B. Marvin was the guide for Harry as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, he had it's still a beautiful sound that he had. He had a tap, a way of playing melodies, just basically straight melodies, really, but sort of being able to crawl inside you, you know.
Yep.
So I loved it.
That's great.
Yeah.
So did you start seeking out lessons at that stage, or were you self-taught?
Gee, you ask good questions, man. This is you're just making it so easy for me to tell you the continuum of this business that I've been talking about. Yeah. Okay, so yes, what happened? I did. I found it was hard to find somebody, I have to say, but I found someone who could teach me a little bit more about the guitar in a music store on the beachfront of Manly. Mm-hmm. So I used to have to get the bus there. And his name was Mr. Peachy. Mm-hmm. And he was a pommy guy with really thick glasses and the ever-present little fag rolly, on his lip. And always looking down through his glasses with his head up. So I'm about 14 or something now. He would have been, maybe 75.
Yep.
He was an old boy, And anyway, I just went, someone's got to teach me something about this. And then I did a few lessons with him. And then he said to my mum, there's no point James coming to me anymore. I can't teach him. He's such a fast learner. He says he's one of the best students, like in that sense that he'd had.
Yep.
So that was what happened then. Then nothing happened lesson-wise, but then I bumped a guy called Cliff Lambert who owned a real Stratocaster. I mean, a fair dinkum, Stratocaster. I'd never really seen one up close before, but he had one. Mm. And I got to know him, and we were talking. He said, I said, I like playing Shadows tunes. And he said, oh, me too. And I said, do you know so-and-so? And he went, yeah. He said, I can play them all. I said, you can play them all? I said, I can only play like 6 of them because I used to go down and order the sheet music in from the local store, and get the old-fashioned sheet music and take it home, put the record on and kind of look at the chord symbols and sort of figure out how to do it. Mm. I said, well, how do you know them all? You can't get all the sheet music. He said, I just figure them out by ear. Mm. And that's when I went, well, I don't even know what that means. Yeah, I have no concept of what that means. He said, well, I figure out what the chords are. And I said, but how can you figure out what the chords are? Because there's always 6 notes in the chords. Because I'm thinking, you're strumming the guitar. There's 6 strings. There's got to be 6 notes.
Yeah.
And he said, look, come over to my house. He was over at Curl, not too far away from DY. He said, come over and I'll show you what I do. So over to his house, we played through a couple that I knew, Apache and stuff like that. And then he showed me what he did, and he had a turntable. He put the vinyl on, and he said, I listened to it. Then I tried to figure out the melody line, but then I listened to what the chords are and what the bass is playing, and I figure out whether the chord's a major chord or a minor chord in particular, because that's kind of the basic chords that we use back in those. It's pretty simple music. And he taught me the difference between the sound of those. And I have to say that was probably will stand as the greatest lesson almost anyone's ever given me in my life. He showed me that the way to learn to play music is to use your ears. Mm. That's how you learn. If you're playing a harmonic instrument, I'm talking about, that's how you do it. So I quickly adopted that method of frustrating at first to try to do it. And he and I formed a duo together called the Strays, and we had little jerkins that were like that shiny material with a big S on it. And we used to play we played in a couple of milk bars for milkshakes.
Oh, great.
I remember. Cool. Yeah. Playing Shadows tunes, of course.
Yeah. Was your music collection starting to change? Were you listening to different types of music at that stage, seeking out more guitarists and
It of course it went on from the Shadows. The Aussie band, there was an Aussie band I really loved called the Atlantics. Mm-hmm. I really love that band. They did an instrumental thing as well. And I really fell in love with what they were up to. But then, of course, it became the Beatles and the Kinks and the Rolling Stones. And that kind of thing, that British invasion sort of music, I guess, for a lot of it. And then it quickly led into, funnily enough, into an interest in jazz. Mm. So by the time I was only been playing for about 3 years, 4 years maybe, 3 years, I developed a real interest in jazz.
Who were the players, or what was the act that made you start thinking and listening to jazz?
Well, it was a band that I was in where we'd lost one of our singers. The band was already working and doing just music of the day, the Kinks and all that stuff locally. Mm. And we lost the singer. Something happened there, I can't remember. And we put an ad in the local paper, or just Sydney Morning Herald or whatever, for a singer wanted for a band. And a few fruitcakes turned up. And then all of a sudden, somebody who could really sing turned up. Right. And I don't know whether this name means anything to you, Stevie. This may not, but you may not know about this person. But a gal called Kerry Bedell turned up.
No, I can't say I know the name.
Kerry Bedell. Mm-hmm. She died just a couple of years ago. Kerry Bedell will go down in history as one of the greatest singers in Australia and one of the greatest singers in the world. Mm-hmm. She was recognised the world over.
Wow.
She turned up for an audition in my garage with the Casper the Friendly Ghost painted on the wall. And she liked what our band was up to and liked what I was up to, and she kind of got me into jazz.
Right.
Yeah. That's how it happened.
Now, who were those jazz guitarists then?
The one that floated my boat, because it basically was the first jazz guitar player that I heard, was Herb Ellis playing Bye Bye Blackbird, okay. A tune that I knew well.
Yeah.
So I knew the melody. Mm. I'd never really played the tune, but I knew the melody in my head. And then I heard him play a solo on it, and I just remember thinking, how can he do that? Mm. What I like what he's doing, but how does he know how to do that? So the jazz quest had started, and then I quickly moved into Barney Kessel, and then found that the longest-lasting love of my life on the guitar, Wes Montgomery, appeared, and he became my kind of, my distant mentor, if you like.
Okay. Yeah. Now, were you starting to gig a fair bit at this stage?
Yep. With Kerry, the band formed at that moment. She was there. It became a band, and personnel changed and things like that. And yes, we ended up doing the circuit and going to Melbourne and doing things and doing all that, surf clubs and stuff. Playing. Sometimes we were playing like jazz tunes, with a kind of a bit of a workover way of doing it. So it was a very unusual band. But because Kerry was the singer that nobody could miss her talent that heard her, it was jaw dropping what she could do. So we had it was a strange band, but it sort of ended up with a kind of almost like an underground following, if you like, because it was weird, Yeah. Oh, I mean, I'll just paint the picture a bit about Kerry, because a lot of the people listening to this may not know it either. And you can go and look her up, of course,
Well, I'll find a link for her and I'll put her in the show notes of this. So
Kerry Bedell.
Yep.
Biddell. Mm-hmm. She, at one point in her life, she was taken across to Las Vegas to the MGM, and they were grooming her to become the next biggest Las Vegas singer, following in the footsteps of Mel Torme and all of the other greats that have ever been there. Mm-hmm. She was at that level. Mel Torme loved her. Right. She just had everyone's attention. It was what she could do was words fail me. Right. And but she was such a down-to-earth Aussie gal, she couldn't stand Las Vegas and the American way. So she just kind of went, stuff this, I'm out of here. She just walked out in the contract.
Yeah, wow.
She just went, I've had enough.
Yep.
It's too stupid for words.
Yep.
Came back.
Right. Did you have anybody else in that band that was kind of, how do I say, kicking your ass? Bit of a senior in the band, you know, like a mentor in the band. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Not in that band, not with the other players, because it was guitar, bass, and drums. But Kerry was always kicking my ass musically because of what she knew about chords and harmony. She played a bit of piano as well, quite a bit. And the way her ears worked, she could kind of hear any chords and decipher anything when she was using her ears to figure out what stuff was. So yeah, and she knew how chords were formed and what the sound of jazz chords and the extensions and all that sort of stuff. And I didn't. And she taught me a hell of a lot about the way that kind of worked. And I'd taken up prior to that, certainly even before I met Kerry, I was very driven to the point of picking up a lot of texts and studying. I've been always self-motivated about studying. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to have anybody tell me to study or what to study. I kind of could always sniff out what I needed to do to become good at it somehow. It just seemed obvious to me, you know. I mean, I figured I need to know scales. I need to know how to play scales and what they mean and how they work. So I bought books about that. Salvador's Single String Studies for Guitar. I went through that book. I chewed up a few books and kept doing that because I'm a self-taught player, actually.
Okay.
Really, yeah. So.
Now, once this band with Kerry, well, I don't know if it dissolved or whatever, but sorry. Let me say, were you starting to get some other gigs as well while in this band with Kerry? Was your horizon starting to broaden a little bit?
Yeah. Towards the end of the life of that band, what happened? We won one of those competitions of the day called the Hoadley's Battle of the Sounds, but we won the vocal section. Because we knew we wouldn't be able to win the band section because the band was too kind of peculiar in its eccentric or whatever in the stuff that we like to do. So we got smart and went, let's try and win it in the vocal section because we could get Kerry to train us how to sing harmonies. Oh, my God, when I think of it now, I can't believe it. Anyway, she trained us and squeezed our faces at times, you know, to go, no, not she'd squeeze your face. Yeah. So not like that. And we won it.
Oh, great.
I mean, no one was more surprised than us.
Right.
We won it. So that took us to England. And that was about 1969 or something like that, I think. Hoadley's Battle of the Sounds, 1969. We went to England, but prior to going, the band had run its race. We thought, we've got a free trip to England. We're going to go over there and we'll all rattle around for a while and then everybody can do what they want to do and come back and that'll be the end of the band. One of the guys stayed on, Mike Hallett, became a big-time producer over there. And Tony Bolton, the drummer, came back before we did. Kerry and I stayed for quite a few months. We were an item at the time and then came back and then sort of our separate ways at that point. And by then I got into other bands and then I started to get an interest in becoming a session guitar player. Right. And I set my sights on that round about sort of the age of 20, 21. I thought I want to be a session guitar player. Now what do I need to do to become one? And I realized I needed, number one, the first thing I needed to do was learn how to read music.
Okay.
So I set about that business of teaching myself how to read music, you know.
When did you learn about session musicians? Was there a particular session guitarist or Because that's probably around the time of the Wrecking Crew as well, I'd say. Am I right there?
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah, Wrecking Crew on one side, and then you've got the Funk Brothers of Motown over there, and you got the Stax Band, and that. Were you kind of wary of that scene at that stage, or was there a session guy, a guitarist in Australia that sort of
triggered it?
Yeah, triggered it. Yes.
I'm just scrolling back. It's it gets blurry, because nothing's black and white in all these things. They're so kind of follow on. But
sure.
Okay, what it was. There was a guitar player called. Oh yeah, okay. I got a little story. Sort of makes sense of what I'm going to say. When I was about 17. That's right. I forgot about this. I found I needed to get more teaching from somebody, and I started to ask around with just musicians in general who was the best guitar player in Sydney, the Sydney area. That I could go and get lessons with. Mm-hmm. And one name kept coming up, and his name was Peter Martin. And I went, I got to get some lessons with Peter Martin. So I found Peter Martin, and he lived at Manly Vale, which wasn't too far away from DY. I mean, lucky. Mm. But when I tracked him down, I tracked down his parents. They said, oh, yeah, you found the right place and the right guy, but he's overseas at the moment. He's been doing gigs in London and then studying some Spanish guitar actually in Spain. Mm. They said he'll be back in 6 or 9 months or something at the time. I went, okay, I'll bide my time. When he came back, I pounced on him and introduced myself and said, I want to get lessons. And he said, I don't really teach. I said, no, but will you? Will you teach? Show me something. Yep. He said, okay, come round. Yeah, I said, I'll do it. So I went round, and he was a little bit older than me by a few years, not too many. And, of course, he knew a lot of stuff. Mm. Anyway, we played together. I thought I was going around for about an hour lesson. We played all afternoon. And at the end of it, he said, do you want to be in a band with me?
Right.
So, he could see that I had a good potential, and I had some stuff together, and I was dead keen, So what happened was, because that led into the session thing, that he ended up forming a band called the Southern Contemporary Rock Assembly, SCRA for short, SCRA. And it was a big band. There's about 12 or 14 or 15 people in it. And he started, because he was a really strong player, he was getting sessions in Sydney. And I said, Peter, I'd like to get into sessions. And he said, I think you could, but you're going to have to learn to read and all that. So that's when I got onto the quest of getting some more skills. And then once I got a bit more stuff under my belt, he would suggest to people that if he couldn't do something, that maybe they'd like to try me. And the same thing had happened, because Kerry Bedell, being the almighty talent that she was, she had already been doing sessions, and she recommended me as well. Okay. So all it took was a couple of recommendations, and if you did a good job and didn't let anybody down, the chances were you get another invite back, and it kind of snowballed from there. Yeah.
So do you remember your very first session, what it was?
Oh, gosh. The very first one. No, I don't think I can, actually. Mm-hmm. Did so many of them.
Yep.
I remember it would have been terrifying, but I can't remember.
It's probably why you can't remember it.
Probably. Well, I'd tell you how I learned to read too, by the way. Cool. I want to just say this, because you go, how do you learn to read? Yeah. Well, there's sort of only one way to learn to read, really. You have to be thrown in the deep end. It really is tough love. It's like the old way of teaching somebody to swim, throw them in the end of the pool where they can't stand up. Yeah. Probably not a good idea, really, but you know what I mean.
Not these days.
Not these days, but that's the way life worked a bit more back then.
Yeah.
And reading, it basically, I don't know if there is any other way to do it. So I went, well, how do I learn how to read? So I started boning up on it and trying to write stuff out. And then I managed to get a 2-day every week 2 weeks of working in for the ABC show band, which is a big band with horns and strings, and they used to record it at a where was it? In Taylor Square in a church. That's right, in Sydney, Taylor Square in a church, and we used to spend 2 days every week there, and you'd walk in, and on your music stand would be a stack of charts. I don't know, there could have been 20, 40 songs there that you were going to record that day for the ABC music archives. Singers were going to come in, blah, blah, blah. You got one kind of run through of the tune, and then it was record. And there was a guy called Roy Plummer, who was the older guitar player, established, that was there. And he was a nice dude. He was so much older than me, and he was of the vintage where he'd actually seen Django Reinhardt play over in England, because he was a Pommy. And he was really helpful to me. I've noticed that a lot of the older players, because I was always younger now, I was incredibly younger than a lot of the people I was playing with, because I seemed to kick on fairly quickly. Everybody was nice to me, really, because they could see I was so keen, I really wanted it, I really wanted to become a good musician and a good guitar player. And so they all helped me, and Roy helped me so much get through that nerve-wracking business of being thrown in the deep end about reading charts and stuff with a very cantankerous band leader with a big handlebar moustache. And Roy helped me out a lot, I can tell you.
Yeah.
He could read anything, by the way. Roy could read. He could transpose stuff on the spot. If they said, we need to take the chart down a tone, I'm going, oh, no. Roy could just look at it's not so hard with chords sometimes, but he could just look at written lines and just go, okay. He could just do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you ever cop a hard time from the band leader?
Yeah. I copped a hard time from that band leader sometimes, because he was pretty prickly. Roy saved me so many times.
Right.
And a couple of times Roy said, he said he's mean, he said he shouldn't have, he said he's asking too much of you, because he said he knows that you're young and trying to get it and you're getting it. He felt for me. So he really bent over backwards to help me.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, but no, I've had a couple of prickly situations. Of course, all of us have, really.
Yeah.
No one gets away with it. Really, if you're insular in your own band, well, that's different. That's another world to me. But if you're going out as a hired gun, you're going to meet situations where perhaps you're not doing what they think that you should be doing.
Of course. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so back into the session scene now.
Yep.
So you would have been doing jingles.
Yep.
Demos.
Yep.
Albums.
Documentaries.
Documentaries, right? Okay.
Docos.
And were you doing movies, TV?
Yes, right. Everything. The whole every aspect of it in some sort of way. Over the years that I did it, I covered every kind singular aspect of it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, did you know what type of session you were going in for when you would get a call? Would it be a call like be at such and such studio at this time? And
yep.
Would they say, well, this is we're doing a doco, or you're doing an album, or you're doing a whole bunch of demos, or
yes.
Yep.
You would always know whether you're going in to, do exactly what you just said.
Yep.
What you didn't know sometimes was, if you're going in to do a jingle, they were very easy.
Okay.
If you're going in to do a record with someone, there might be some prickly stuff in there to handle. If you're going in to do some Muzak, I did a lot of Muzak type sessions. They were nerve-wracking because sometimes you would get charts that with very difficult stuff written down that they expected you to play.
Can you tell me what Muzak is? I haven't heard that.
Muzak was a term for what it's been called elevator music.
Oh, okay.
Think of Kenny G.
I got you.
I
now.
don't mind saying that, actually.
Muzak.
In fact, I'm pleased to say that. Like just Muzak-y. It's just pleasant, whatever bullshit, that gets recorded, and you'd go in the lift in David Jones or whatever in Gowings in town, and and they'd be playing that sort of music. It supplied that sort of little backdrop thing to life.
So it's like library music.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Right.
Yeah, like library music. Yeah.
Music.
Yeah, they call it music. That's what they call it.
Right.
So it's sort of music, but really it's sort of like Muzak. And it became a term. We went, another Muzak thing. Oh, God, help us all. But it paid the bills.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
One of the things I realised about that, by the way, when you're playing disco music with the bass going dung ding dung ding dung ding dung ding dung ding, real old-fashioned stuff.
Yep.
I would never listen to it, but actually it was quite fun to play.
Right.
Yeah. It was funky,
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Now, at the heyday of it all, how many sessions would you be doing a day? And was it a case of, I've heard stories like, for example, the Wrecking Crew, Hal Blaine would have a drum kit set up in this studio, and he'd be on that session from that time to that time. His cartage and his people had already had another kit set up at this studio, so it would be straight over to that session. Meanwhile, someone packs up that drum set, takes it to that studio. Was it ever like that?
In a way, but not quite as illustrious and streamlined, perhaps.
Yeah.
On the big days, a big day would be where I'd do 3.
Mm-hmm.
I maybe did 4, maybe a few times a day, but that would mean that the people that were booking you understood that, like the first couple were going to have to be done quick, and that may have worked fine because they knew you by then. They'd say, "Oh, it's just a jingle. You'll be out in an hour.
Yep.
You'll be out in an hour. You'll have plenty of time." So it'd be 3, but on the big days. But that would mean me schlepping the gear 3 times. I had no one carrying the gear.
That was going to be my next question. Did you have somebody helping you? Okay.
There were times towards the end where, yes, I would have to get somebody to do something in that way because the time was tight. But mainly I did it myself, like everybody did, actually. Everyone did. Yeah. Right. You schlepped your own gear.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mentioned Wrecking Crew and, Funk Brothers and, there's other sort of groups where it's a core group of musicians that are doing all those sessions. Now, was there a core of you guys, yourself and a bass player, drummer, or whatever? Was it the same guys that were basically doing most of the sessions?
I don't think it was as tight-knit as what our American counterparts were.
Okay.
Ours probably was a little bit more like the LA scene. That's the one that we looked at the most.
Yep. Where
there definitely were rhythm sections that worked together.
Yep.
But there wasn't like ones that you'd sort of go to and call them like the Wrecking Crew and it used to be called like the hit makers and stuff.
Yep.
It wasn't quite like that. But there were ones like, for example, with myself, obviously, Doug Gallagher playing the drums.
Yep.
Greg Lying playing bass and say Tony Ansell playing keyboards. We did so many things together. Right. And of course we ended up becoming a good unit. So, and then people that were smart would recognize that, by the way, and go, "Oh, let's book the unit," because they got a language between themselves,
Yeah.
So yes, it happened, but I don't think it was quite as tight knit as the Wrecking Crew. But then again, I don't think that the LA scene was quite as tight as the Wrecking Crew either. It was a little bit more open.
I just threw that out as an example.
No, it's a good example. Yeah. No, it's a good one.
Just really curious as to how that went down. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about Crossfire now.
Okay.
And how Crossfire came about. What stage into this session scene were you, and when was that moment that you decided to form this band, Crossfire?
Well, the Crossfire thing, let me see. Crossfire started pretty early in the piece when I'd started doing sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one point where I decided to, with my wife, Jules, she's a POM, and we got married over there. We were going to stay and see if we could make a bit of a go of it over in England. It didn't work out. I wasn't happy over there. But I had a gig to go to in Hong Kong that I'd knocked back before we went to the UK. And when we decided to leave UK, instead of coming home, I called the band leader and said, "Is that gig still open?" Mm-hmm. His name was Peter Nelson. And he'd lived in Hong Kong for quite a while. And he said, funnily enough, the guitar players decided to go home. So, yes. I said, "Oh, well, I'll take it, come over to Hong Kong and we'll just see what that's like for a while." When we got there, it was just a good band playing in one of the hotels 6 nights a week. And that's where I met Greg Lyon, the bass player. Mm-hmm. And Greg, because he lived in the East for about 7 years, 6 or 7 years prior to that, he went over for the Vietnam business as a player, that is, as an entertainer, a player, and stayed on. And he was well ensconced in that neck of the wood of Asia. And because he lived over there, he had access to a whole bunch of records and things that we weren't getting back here, vinyl.
Okay.
So his hotel room, which was where he lived, it looked like some sort of hi-fi shop. He had stuff everywhere, turntables and whatever, good speakers and like hundreds and hundreds of vinyl records, Chick Corea and all this stuff that we hadn't heard back here. He's a really talented player, and he was playing the bass unlike anything that I'd ever heard back here.
Right.
And then so I get going in the band with all that going on, and then Mick Kenny, who was one of the linchpin players in Crossfire, he played trumpet and keyboard, and he came over as a trumpet player. He took the trumpet chair over in the band. And of course, with Greg and all that, we decided, gee, when we all get back to Sydney, let's form a band and start playing some of this Chick Corea stuff, and let's have a look at that sort of music,
Yep.
I decided to break the contract. I didn't like living there, either did Jules, my wife. So I broke the 6-month contract after 3 months. And they said, "Oh, well, you can't." I said, "Well, stop me. I'm going, I'm out." And I left. Greg and Mick stayed on in the band for a while. Then they went to the UK, I think, after that. And then we'd already said that when we all come back to Sydney, let's get a band together. So a couple of years or a year after that, we all did arrive back in Sydney and we got a band together. And that's how it started. So in a way, Crossfire did start in Hong Kong.
Right.
Because of I knew Mick before that from Sydney, but neither Mick or I knew Greg really. So it was just hearing Greg's great bass playing that we went, wow, let's do this, So that's kind of how it started.
Mm. So from that moment where you guys had said, okay, when we come back to Sydney, let's put a band together.
Yeah.
Did you start coming up with ideas and writing music for that time when you guys ended up getting together in a studio or in a room or whatever and to put this band together? Were you starting to think about that music?
Well, what happened was I think what had happened was, when I really think about it, Greg had come back, but I think he had to be down in Melbourne or something because that's where he came from first. So Mick and I started up a little blow kind of band at a place called French's Wine Tavern on Oxford Street in Sydney. And we had a bass player called Johnny Young, playing with us. And I think it might have been John Proud playing the drums. And Mick had written 2 tunes at the time. Mick Kenny had, because he'd been deep into writing things and stuff I hadn't. And because we only had 2 tunes, that's what we played. We play one tune for a whole set, and then the second tune for the the second set. So
lots of solos and stuff.
Yeah, oh yeah, the tune would it'd just go for an hour, with everybody, with it all breaking down and turning into all these other things because we're experimenting with improvising and carrying on.
Oh, that's cool.
It was cool, and then Greg came into it, and then we got a bit more serious. And then we started doing more gigs, and the prospect of recording came up after a couple of years. And we decided mixed tunes, they're unbelievable, but they're heavy going. Like they're very deep, and there was a lot of classical kind of element in them as well. So it was quite unusual. He had a strange mix of classical and gospel going on, and he loved Miles Davis and, like we all did, all our influences were pretty much the same, although I hadn't that much classical kind of influence at that point. So we need more material. I said, well, what do you reckon, Mick? I might try and write something. I've never written anything before. I'll write something and see if it works out. And I wrote a tune called Remember the Trees. That was my first song. And lo and behold, it worked out. And it actually made it onto the first album. So the first song I ever wrote made it onto an album. Yeah, it was worthy, of being on it. Right. And I realised, maybe I can do this, So I just kept writing. And it's like anything. If anybody writes a song, all you got to do is to get better at it is just keep writing other songs,
That's it.
So that's what I did. And then it worked out that Mick's stylistic way of composing and mine were totally different, but they worked well together, especially when you put them together and you formulated a night of music. They were good foils for each other,
Right.
So that's the way it sort of worked out. And then other guys in the band wanted to write stuff, of course, and we tried that, but it didn't seem to work out as much. So it was a bit more time wore on. Mick and I just said flat out to anybody that was in the band, Jim and I handle the writing. That's kind of the end of it.
I was going to ask about.
It's the identity of the band. It became the identity of the sound of the band.
Yeah.
And then people asked, did we write together? And we didn't. We never ever wrote together.
Right.
We never collaborated
because you're a bunch of fiercely creative musicians. To me trying to think about how you would try and put that music together when you've all got these fantastic ideas. If everybody was given open slather to be able to write, you can just imagine it just being train wrecks, everybody wanting to get their thing in there, but by sort of calling it at the start, saying we're basically the two main writers. Let's kind of go with that. That's probably why it works so well, eh?
You hit something, a nail on the head there. As the years wore on, because Crossfire ended up having a long life, we ended up realising that the democratic approach to a band is very difficult.
Yeah.
It's. I don't think it actually works, to be honest with you.
Yeah, right.
It needs to come from a smaller group of people within it, and that's the way Crossfire worked, or from a singular individual.
Yep.
And if you got people that are doing that are good at it and nice about it and got the smarts, it works out. Because the democratic thing, in a way, can hold you back, because if someone's got an idea and an opinion, you're duty bound to test it and suck it and see and all that stuff. And it can lead to a lot of confusion. It takes up a lot of time. And sometimes it can weaken the direction that the whole thing might be going in. Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because
do you? I can tell.
Oh yeah, can you by me nodding and
I can
smile? Yeah,
but I think a lot of people might say that too. It's just one of those things. As you get older, you realise. Yeah. If you're in a younger band and it always was that way, perhaps it can work. But when you get older and then you're getting more opinions about what it is and things that you like and this, that, and the other, but while still remaining open, to everything as much as you possibly can. It can implode if everybody's got equal say. Like I remember trying to mix something with Crossfire, and everybody was welcome at the mix.
Right,
a whole day was wasted as people kept throwing their opinion in. Oh, that tom-tom's too loud. The kick drum, can that be fatter? Oh, can this? The horn, we're not hearing the horn enough. It just went on and on and on. Yeah. And finally, people were shooed out of the room, and it got down to it got down to Mick and I, and mostly me. By the way, I realised that I seemed to have the better handle on being able to talk to the engineer and realise the sound of the band a bit more, perhaps, than really anybody in it. So it was just one of those little, maybe another side of my musicality that was starting to pop up.
Yep.
Which is probably why I can do studio stuff now.
Yeah.
It's always been there. I never really pursued it until now, but there you go. Yeah.
So were you guys always self-produced when it came to recording?
A great question. Yes, the first one we did, no. Okay. And first album we did, and we found it a bit difficult with the guy. He didn't really get what we were on about. He was pretty cool, but it was a little bit push and pull and unnecessarily. So after that, the next one we did, we insisted that we produce it. Then by the time we'd done 2 or 3 albums, and we really had a strong following, I mean an enormous following.
Right.
When Warner Brothers grabbed us because they wanted us, they just said, there's no way in the world we're going to give you a producer. They just said, do what you do. We love what you do. Nobody here knows anything about what you're doing. We all like it. Just do it.
Great.
It was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you guys were the first Australian artists to use direct-to-disc recording.
We were.
Right. So can you explain, for the people that don't understand what that is and how that opportunity got presented and how it all went down?
Okay, well, direct-to-disc became a bit of a fad thing there for a while. There were quite a few albums fell out of America with it, in particular. What direct-to-disc was a way, in the traditional way of recording back in the day, you'd record to go onto the 2-inch tape, as it were, the big reel going around, and everybody knows that look. Then that would get bounced down to a 1/4-inch tape. That tape then would go off to the replicators that are going to turn it into vinyl. They would use that tape, and that's the sound that they would use then to cut a mastered, I've forgotten what the word is for that, acetate or something, I'm not sure, a master disc that they would cut and then use that as the master disc to make replicate it in vinyl.
Yep. So
there's, in other words, each step of the way is a process through electronica, noise introductions and whatever, but that's the sound of vinyl. Mm-hmm. To do a direct-to-disc, it was the process of taking the 2-inch tape and the 1/4-inch tape out of the equation. You recorded, and an engineer cut it straight onto that master disc, the 12-inch disc. So it was more pure. That everything had a different transient sound, etc., and so on. So that's what it was, in a nutshell. But it's difficult to do because you had to get round where the lathes were that could do the cutting. Mm-hmm. The lathes and all that machinery were too big to move, so you had to put the band around it. So we went, they took us to, I've forgotten where it was, but we were set up in all these offices and stuff, with the closed circuit TVs, and people set up down alleyways to make separation. And the thing is, when you do it, because records back then, I think they were like 44 minutes was 22 minutes aside is the 45 minutes for an album. 22 minutes aside was, you couldn't go above that because they couldn't cut enough bass into it and all that stuff. There's a limitation to the amount of, sort of levels and things you can put in vinyl. Yep. So they had to be 22 minutes. So we had to time the tracks out to come out at that. And once they start cutting, you can't stop. You only stop after one side's done. So you have to do one whole side in one take, and that is doing silent count-ins and all that sort of stuff. So it was nerve-wracking, man.
Yeah.
It was nerve-wracking.
Yeah. I guess, you would really have to know your songs, and
you had to know, yeah.
And the tempo is, I suppose, the tempo's having it timed out to 22 minutes aside or whatever it was. Was the drummer playing to a click?
Oh no, there's no one was kind of using click back then. No, it was.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, it's just
so you just had to be. You just had to be on.
Just count, because we played them so many times. Just count it off. I mean, one of the hardest things to do was for a guitar player, as much more so than anybody, is keep the guitar in tune.
Right.
See what I mean?
Right.
Like you.
Yeah.
And maybe that was even before tuners were around. Because there's nothing, because if you record something's great that you do, but the guitar's horribly out of tune, it's buggered. I mean,
that's it.
It's a shot duck.
How did you go about doing that? Was it a matter of getting yourself in that whatever room you're in and getting it into an environment where
keeping your eye on it all, and in the little break in between, putting your ear on the guitar and just quickly tuning a little bit or something. It was very nerve-wracking, man.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
If I had $2 in my wallet.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the podcast. As you know, the Gig Life podcast is free. You don't have to pay anything ever. But if you find the value in the Gig Life podcast, you can donate or leave a tip. Go to thegiglifepodcast.com, click on that donate button and give as little or as much as you like, and just know that anything you give will go back into creating the great content for this podcast. All right. Back to the episode. Now, how was Crossfire taken internationally? Was there ever a point there where it could have been taken further?
Quite possibly. I'll give an example.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe, I think this is right, we were the first Australian band to be invited to play at the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland.
Yep.
When we worked with Michael Franks, when that came about, at the conclusion of doing the tour with the American singer Michael Franks, and subsequently an album came out of that, which we didn't know we were going to do. He liked the band so much, he said, I want to make an album out of this. At the conclusion of that fairly short tour that we did with Michael, he said, I wish you guys lived in the States. He said, I would be happy to play on any stage in the world with you guys.
Wow.
He said, I would, because he was recording with Larry Carlton and Johnny Guerin and all these heavyweight people at the time, Joe Sample. But when he went out on the road, he couldn't get those people. They were too expensive. So a lot of the times the bands that he did get weren't quite as strong as the, those real heavyweight players. But he said to us you guys, I'd be happy to have you play behind me on any stage. So that meant a lot to us. Made us feel like we'd, made some sort of inroads into it all.
Right. So what did you then do about that?
Well, what we did about that was perhaps about nothing, I suppose. It kind of got so it sort of got so big for us here. I'll just give an example of the bigness. When we really sort of hit our straps and people were taking a lot of notice, we did a little tour of Melbourne. Then I think on that second tour, we went down, we did, say, 10 nights in a row in mostly hotels, in pubs around inner city Melbourne, a little bit out for a couple. 10 nights in a row. We were filling every single pub to capacity with standing room only and a queue out the front waiting for someone waiting to leave. They let one more person in. Standing up, going Burko to a lovely bunch of young men playing instrumental music. Can you believe that?
How cool is that?
It's just, when you say it now, you just go, did that really happen? It did happen. Right. It did happen. Because no one had heard it before.
Yeah.
See? No one had ever really heard Well, they hadn't heard the songs before because we wrote them. So you're basically hearing it and hearing the stylistic thing and the skill of the players and the heavy emphasis on improvising that was in the band. It was big, Some of the tunes, they'd still go for, 20 minutes. We just let them, if they're going, you just let them go. Let it go, Yeah. People went crazy.
It's like Australia's weather report.
In a way.
In a way,
In a way. Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. So the years rolled on and we kept making records and things. We did quite a few. And we had a couple of big moments with Lee Ritenour came out and did a tour with us. Michael Franks, the Montreux Jazz Festival, and we
that's the record. Is that the recording?
Yes. That's a recording. Yeah. And that video, you can watch the whole thing on YouTube.
Yeah, I've watched most of it. It's great. Yeah.
How do I think that it went for so long that, the fusion thing started to corrupt a little bit, I thought.
Okay.
The goodness is the two things that happened in it to me. So this is just my opinion, about this. But I was in it at the time, but this is my opinion. Two things happened. The bands that we're looking up to and following in the States started to become very, very complicated. There was a lot of chop business going on, especially with the Chick Corea band and all that album called Romantic Warrior. Yeah. Al Di Meola perhaps was on chops. And then there was a kind of a Muzaki thing that was going on with bands like Spyro Gyra, where they were just cute little melodies. So there were these two things that happened to it that I didn't think were great for the overall thing. See, the Crossfire band was built more around blues and gospel music and mix love of classical sounds and things. And so we had a slightly unusual thing in it, but nobody in the band was what I would call a technical virtuoso. We just pulled together really nicely as a team.
Yep.
And our main group that we loved through the whole thing were the Crusaders. They used to be called the Jazz Crusaders and then became the Crusaders. And in fact, the name Crossfire is the title of one of Joe Sample's tunes, Crossfire, and he was the keyboard player in the Crusaders. Mm-hmm. We followed that style stylistically more. And then all of a sudden it started to become more chop kind of heavy. So that once it became more chops and then sort of more Muzaki, it sort of watered the whole thing down a little bit. In other words, the chops business was starting to ask too much of the listener to get involved. It was getting a bit too complicated for its own good. And, became a bit Olympic, keep it up and you'll disappear up your own vortex eventually, And the Muzaki one, of course, well, that's just silly. That's just belittling the whole thing to me anyway.
Yeah.
So there was a kind of fracture in it and fusion almost became a dirty word, So I think the band had gone long enough to see that we weren't going to get that any kind of worldwide traction. And the fact is we still lived in Australia, by the way, and it is a long way away from the rest of the world. I mean, it's all well, it's easy to say, why didn't you go? But it's big, to move families because there's guys in it that are married and children and all that sort of stuff. It's not easy. So it just ran its kind of race, I guess, Yeah.
Okay, so what did you do after Crossfire then? Well, I won't say. I'm not saying that Crossfire ended and then you started doing something else. I'm sure you were doing other stuff as well.
Of course I was, yeah.
Yeah. You were saying earlier that, you're already entrenched into that session scene.
Yeah.
How did you see that session scene start to change? Do you remember any noticeable changes? CD, tape not getting used as much, samples starting to get used.
Yes, towards the end of my the end of my career in it. Just to paint the picture about my session life, I did 12 years in it. Took 2 years to gradually wind into it. Become quite well known or very well known, and it took 2 years to fall out the other end, and 8 years where I pretty much lived off it in a very exclusive kind of way. I'd do some gigs, but I was working so hard during the day, I wasn't trying to work myself completely to death.
Yeah.
So, there was a time where I was only doing the odd gig here and there, but it started to break down after that length of time, and producers change and want new blood in it and all that sort of thing. I think 10 years in the session world is like a kind of a generation for sure. Okay. And I'd had enough by then. I'd had enough of doing it, schlepping the gear all of the time and all that sort of thing. And yes, the drum machine had come into it. Things started to change a little bit. Click tracks came into it more. It ended up being not quite as much sort of good get together, all play together fun as it used to be, just the modern world had started. So that I fell out of that. I fell back into gigs again and really threw myself at that and did put together a lot of different bands that had a lot of success at the Basement in Sydney, this, that and the other. And then I started to see the whole music scene started to break down a little bit. A lot of my mates were finding it really difficult to make a living, where prior to that we could all make a reasonable living at this, that's when I started teaching more at home. I could see it's going to change, I could feel it. And it did. I was right. And then the opportunity came to move up this way and do some teaching at the university here in Lismore, and that ended up being a 20-year, almost 18 years of teaching there. And I'm still up here now. I came up in 1990, by the way.
Yep.
So I've always been a little bit lucky in my ability to look at and sense the shift in the business. What do I have to do to keep in being involved in music to make a living for my family is how I've looked at it, and keep up the idea of being the musician that I want to be, So that's been my whole focus, really, I suppose. So in a nutshell, I'll just sum that up. So that means gigs when I first started, into the session world, and Crossfire lived in amongst all that session world.
Yep.
Back to gigs again. Then that started to fracture, then a little bit more private teaching, and then leave Sydney and do a 20-year stint at tertiary teaching.
Yep.
And now that brings me to now that I'm finishing off the last quarter of my musical existence on this planet running a recording studio.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, when I interviewed Harry, you might remember he was talking about, I was asking him a fair bit about the James Jamison hook technique. And he said, and he remembers specifically a moment, a time where technically he was at his, like he just knew he was technically where he wanted to be, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever had that moment where you've, technically had this idea of how you wanted to play, and then you've kind of hit that technical freedom, let's say, that you've got your facility down, that whatever you're basically thinking you can play?
I don't know whether I've really ever hit that one. Mm-hmm. What I've noticed is, what have I noticed? Technique means a lot of things, by the way. But if you're talking about guitar players in particular, let's just stay with that for a sec.
Yep.
When somebody says somebody's got good technique, generally they mean the person can play quickly. They got good velocity. That's kind of the general way of trying to indicate what the word he's got or she's got good technique.
Okay.
As far as velocity technique goes, I've never been really good at that, because there's just it didn't matter how much I practiced, I could never, say, pick the guitar like John McLaughlin could, where he picked every note, or like Pat Martino. No matter how much I practiced, I could never, ever do that. And I've noticed that in students, some people, there's a point where you can do it and there's a point where you can't do it.
Right.
You have, when you realise, and it'll probably be around about the age of, mid-20s, it's never going to happen. What you have to do is let go of that and then work on every other aspect of your playing so that you end up having really good technique to do. That is to play what you can play. You can play it all very, very accurately with a good time feel, with a great sound and a great touch. That's what technique becomes.
I guess that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're saying about technique was probably not the right word, but to be able to have your facility at a point where whatever you think that you want to play, you're able to play it. I guess that's what I was.
You did ask it like that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool.
It was a good question. Nicely put as well. I perhaps went off on that technique when I wanted to get that in because I just want to clear that one up, about what that means when people generally at a general level talk about technique. Because I'm saying that somebody that plays quite a slow hand like a Bill Frisell has got the most incredible technique. But there may be some people that go, oh, no, there's guitar players that got way more technique than him. But they're generally talking about perhaps velocity at that point,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what that means. But technique is an all-encompassing word. But yes, I guess so. I mean, like Mark Punch, a great guitar player, said once that there's always a point where you hear somebody do something that you love and you go, I can't do that with my technique, and you wish you could. You wouldn't be human if you said no, unless you're one of those guys that really is the fastest guitar player or the fastest, quickest moving limb drummer on the planet Earth.
I suppose I guess to them, there's still somewhere else that they want to go.
I guess so.
It's always going to be that. Yeah.
I guess so. I mean, absolute. But I suppose I've got to a point where I got enough technique. To me, it was always more about having enough musical understanding to deal with the music that was in front of me. And I have to tell you, I am known as a jazz guitar player, and it took me a lot of years before I was even game enough to say that I might think of myself as a jazz guitar player, because to me, I never set out to be a jazz guitar player. I just loved jazz, but I was smart enough to know if I want to know how music goes together harmonically, I need to look in jazz, because you won't get that through R&B and pop and rock and straight blues. Mm-hmm. Yes, you'll get a lot of answers are going to be answered. A lot of your questions rather going to be answered in those genres. But if you want to understand how it really goes together, jazz is the most dense arena for that, apart from classical. Jazz are music that you can take part in. And I actually looked in jazz mainly to get, if someone plays E13 flat 9 to me, how do I know what notes to play on it, and different unusual chord progressions. I've always set out to try to get my technique to the point in my mind where if somebody gives me the most unusual chord progression, after a little bit of time, I can make very good sense of it. I can start to hear and see and figure out a way to actually get through the thing chordally and playing a solo through it. That's been my main quest, I have to say.
Now, going back to Dave Sanders, Dave has a question. Who were the musicians that influenced you, and what qualities do you think have rubbed off on you? Well, the earlier days was definitely Cliff Lambert, the guy that introduced me to the Shadows and using my ears to play. Okay, so he definitely influenced me. Yep. After that, there was Kerry Bedell. She was a huge influence on me. Yep. Mark Punch, the guitar player, was a big influence on me. We ended up playing together. I was mucking about with some jazz at the time I met him as a young man, and he was more into Scotty Moore and R&B of the time and blues. I'd listened to quite a bit of that stuff, but never paid a lot of attention.
but I liked his enthusiasm for it. He liked what I was up to because I had a few extra chords and things under my belt, and we hung out together. And then we ended up playing in the very first Renee Gay band called Mother Earth. We played together with Harry Bruce, by the way.
With Harry, yeah.
And Russell Dunlop was the drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I got the shits with jazz. I remember getting so frustrated trying to break the code of it. I took all my jazz records down to Ashwood's in Pitt Street of the time, which is a secondhand vinyl shop, and I sold the whole collection. I just went, get it out of my life. I've had it. Yeah. I'm just going to play the blues. Because Mark was a really big influence on me.
Okay.
Yeah, he was absolutely huge. And then, of course, there was every person that pretty much that I worked with that was older than me. I was working with Errol Butler, an incredible jazz saxophone player who was way, way older than me. And I learned so much from these guys, just playing with them, just listening to them and how they phrase things and did this, that, and the other. I learned. I was always a question guy, I remember Cole Nolan, the mighty keyboard player, but really at the organ. He did we're playing some groovy tune at the time down at the Rocks, Push somewhere or somewhere like that. And when it came to the turnaround of the tune, just to get back to the top of the form, he did this unusual turnaround. And as soon as we came off, I just walked up to him and said, Cole, what was that? What was that you did? I need to. So everyone's influenced me. And when they've done something, they've done something that piqued my interest, I always asked them. And they always answered me, by the way. And here's an answer that I got from a lot of the older musicians, which I didn't believe at the time. And now that I am one of those older musicians, I know it to be absolutely true. I said, what do you think is the most important thing about all this that we're doing, playing jazz and just playing music and just being a musician? And so many of them said, it's the time feel. And I went, surely it's knowing songs and being able to change the key of them and doing this, that, and the other, all these other things. And they said, yeah, of course, that's all important, but the time feel. And now I know that to be true. Yeah. It's the time feel that's the most important thing in all of it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter how beautifully placed you are with your harmonic knowledge, with this really beautiful sound and, all the tunes in the world, if you don't play them with a good time feel or indeed play them out of time, what you're playing is musically is a pile of nothing.
Yeah.
You're better off not knowing very much, having just an ordinary sound and playing with a great time feel.
Well, my next question was going to be what makes a good rhythm section. And I think time feel would probably answer that, yeah?
It is.
Yeah, you can have a drummer that's, got all the chops but if he hasn't got a good feel or can't, I won't say keep time because, that's subjective because time is allowed to move and stretch, but you've got to know when to take it,
But to me, it is what you're saying, of course. Like I know what you meant by that keep time, of course, But good time can be quite elastic,
Exactly, yeah.
We know what it means not to keep time, by the way. It means you unravel, it just falls.
Unravel, that's a good one.
Yeah, it falls to pieces, I think that what makes it work is the beautiful meeting of the minds that happens for all of us, not so many players in your whole life, how you all fit together. And that means is if it's working for you, you got a band that's working, then you lose your drummer, you get another drummer in and it doesn't work. Does that mean that drummer that came in is not up to it or wrong? No, it just means the combination doesn't quite work. If you change the bass player, the same thing could happen as well, by the way. It is that unusual thing where there's a meeting of the minds and about where you want the beat to sit and the way that you are willing to push and pull with each other. That's the magical part. It's the drug part of it. It's the hardest one to get. I've played with so many people my whole life that I really love playing with them, but the ones that I really love playing with are a fairly smallish group compared to the number of people who I have played with.
Yep.
Yet I love, but am I saying everybody else I didn't enjoy it? I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's a unique thing when it happens, you know.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. I understand. Let's talk a little bit more about your recording studio now.
Okay.
We'll go back to the teaching a little bit. I just wanted to ask, you spent all that time as you were the head of the guitar studies at the Southern Cross University.
Yep.
Now, did you design the syllabus?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Was that right from the outset, from when you got there?
Yep. But
okay, cool.
I had a head start because I'd done a lot of teaching in Sydney prior to that, and it's like I've just tried to do the same thing with any aspect of music that I've taken on. I've tried to do the best I can. If I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to really teach. I'm going to get good stuff together for people. If I'm going to run a recording studio, I'm going to do as much as I can to learn about how to do it all. And so I've just kept the same kind of mindset up through the whole journey. So I already had a bunch of stuff that, thank God I did actually when I started, coming in on the tertiary end of things. And yes, I did. So I did fine tune the course over a number of years. Yeah.
What's been the most difficult aspect of that? Being the head of guitar studies at university.
The most difficult aspect, there's two that have become the most difficult aspects of doing this type of thing. It's disinterested students. They make it very difficult for me to operate in the way I need to operate if they're not really interested. I don't even mind if somebody's not incredibly naturally talented. You can all of us are going to get better if we practice the right things. I've had a lot of cats that you wouldn't say that they were kind of gifted that way, but as long as they were into it, I love teaching them. But the minute anybody was dicking around with my time and not interested, I really didn't like it. So there's that. And I also didn't like the bureaucratical thing above me that changed a lot, who had no kind of real respect for the people, the teachers in the trenches. They would, they'd throw you on a sword, quickest look at you. To protect their own positions in things. They really see. I just look at it. If you're running a business, the people that are working, that you're the boss. You're looking at a whole bunch of people. I like to think that I would keep them all really happy. Yeah. I like to know who they are, what their name is. Yeah. Keep them happy. Well, and let's all have a good time while we do it. That actually doesn't happen very much in that world.
Yeah. Wow.
In your faculty, you'll find that there's a great brotherhood, because Dave Sanders was a teacher there, so was Greg Lyon. No problemo at all. I'm talking about once you start going higher up the chain.
Yeah, I got you. Yep, gotcha. All right, so back to the recording studio. Yeah. So when did you start thinking about your own recording studio? Is this why you were still teaching at the uni? Or had you sort of wound out the uni and you were thinking of something to do?
Yeah, I wound out of the uni gradually. I didn't just just stop. Went down in time and down to nothing, and then finally. And in between that time, I'd formed a good friendship with a guy that built an instrument for me, and we started talking about. He had a good workshop. There was an old general store in the countryside here, and we thought. Let's record some stuff, And so it just took off from there. And then Russell Dunlop from Sydney, who was the original drummer in the Mother Earth band with Harry and Mark Punch and myself and Renee, he moved up and he bought into the business too. So we had a three-way financial interest in this, making a little studio come together. And we started to make some inroads. But I didn't do anything with the computer. I was more like the musical director, directing the traffic musically. Russell was the main linchpin guy with the actual mixing, and Les, the other bloke that owned the place, he was more the hands-on technical guy doing the tracking, et cetera, and so on. So we had a nice three-way split.
Yep.
And then Russell managed to leave the planet in the most spectacular fashion. He went down to Sydney for his son's wedding, and was playing at the wedding and playing with Barry Leaf and Bill Twyman, little trio thing at his son's wedding, and promptly fell unconscious on the bandstand in between a set, and he didn't make it. So that rocked our boats, I can tell you. That rocked the boats of a lot of people. He was the greatest cat, groovy drummer.
Oh, yeah.
We all love Russell. And it frightened us too, because Russell, we all thought he was the guy that the cat couldn't scratch. He was made of blue steel. But it just lets you know that you're not sometimes, you know.
That's it.
You got to be careful. Yeah. Don't be too blokey about aches and pains, I reckon, is my advice. Yep. And so all of a sudden I was now started to do some of the mixing over at the studio. And I was kind of, you know, Les had good confidence in me. I didn't have a lot of myself. I did something for a band, and I went, I can't do this. And he calmed me down, and I said, I had another go at the mix, and it came out a bit better. And then it went from there. And then Les and I ended up splitting the studio up. He really wasn't that fussed about running it anymore. And I brought all the gear home that I'd bought with my share of it all and piled it up in this double garage here and went, well, what am I going to do? And then just got the idea, I think I'll really go, I'm going to try and do it. And that's what happened. So I just kept at it, you know, and I have to say, it's mixing. It's like I study it. All I'm doing about it is what I did. Because I knew where to look to learn how to play the guitar.
Yeah.
I figure I know where to look to learn how to mix, you know.
Yeah.
You just got to figure it out. It's mostly where to look. Don't listen to people that don't know what they're talking about. There's no point. Yeah.
And the big part of mixing too, it also goes back to what your old mate said about using your ears.
Yeah.
Got to use your ears.
It's the ears. I mean, yeah. It's not the gear. I mean, you can just have reasonable gear and you can still make great stuff. It's not gear. It just isn't, you know.
Mm. What do you find's the biggest challenge with, say, for example, Logic, because you're recording into Logic?
One of the hardest things to do, I'll say it this way, then we can maybe figure out if I haven't answered you. I'm not sure if this is going to answer it.
Cool.
Beyond a shadow of a doubt, the thing that's the biggest challenge is recording a band all at once.
Okay.
When you got the multiple mic thing around the drums and you're taking care of everybody, 4 or 5 people all performing at once, and you're taking care of the headphone mix, you're watching the levels, you're keeping your ear and your eye on everything. That is one of the biggest challenges.
The management.
The management. And of course, if something goes wrong, which it does a lot, can with the computer, and the Logic program might be giving you grief, that's what becomes a really stressful problem when there's people sitting here twiddling their thumbs while you're trying to sort it out.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about your approach to actually like tracking yourself and recording yourself these days, coming from that, 12-year career in sessions.
Yep.
No doubt a huge part of that, you would have gone in and you would have been playing whole takes because, you know, you're doing it to tape and you don't have that option to punch in, and maybe you do a little bit, but you know what I'm saying.
I do.
You learn that skill of, you know, playing from start to finish and then doing it over and over and over and again. That's just what you had to do, right?
Yeah.
These days, we have Logic and Pro Tools and stuff, and it's digital, and we're able to just record one note or whatever.
Yes.
When you go to track yourself.
Yep.
Are you still going in with that old school mindset of playing the whole thing and then maybe playing it again, or are you very conscious of that? You know you can do it quickly another way. So do you go down the route of just recording what you have to record?
Okay, I got some thoughts about this.
Cool.
Number one is when you stop doing gigs. Like I used to be a gig guy. That's what I did.
Yep.
I could never ever see any point in my life, as long as I was healthy and upright, where I wouldn't be out doing gigs. Well, I am healthy and upright, but I'm not out doing gigs. I haven't been for a long time now.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is that you do lose a match condition bit of business about playing in the immediate way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's bound to happen because we're all being kept in a kind of a state of some sort of musical fitness by the number of gigs that you do.
Yep.
That's what keeps you, So there's that. The other thing is that when you go to do an overdub, just say it's a solo, you do an overdub for a solo. When you do a solo at the gig and it's going into the ether, if it's a good solo, well, like a world beater, one of your best, it's gone into the ether. People love it. If it's one of your worst, it's gone into the ether and people forget about it. It's gone. There's no repercussions for it one way or the other about having it immortalized. This business of doing it here, that means sometimes I might find myself playing a solo on something at 11 o'clock, before lunch. I'm sitting here by myself with there's no stimulus from other people, laughter and life and a bar over there and all the things that go to make a gig that make you play the way you play when you get back on after you got the first set out of the way. Now you're really warmed up. None of that exists when you do it from here.
Mm-hmm.
I've learnt to not be too hard on myself about not being able to do it from the top to the bottom and get it dead right, because I go, hang on a second, because when I do spend more time and do quite a few drop-ins, once it's done, it's done. That's all that people are going to hear.
Yep.
And when I hear it done and I go, gee, that I've worked on that one, I'm happy with that. Do you know that when I was in match condition, on any given night, I could play a solo nowhere near as good as that, or I could possibly even play a solo that was way better than that.
Yep.
I could go either side of it in the real way of playing. So you see what I'm saying there? Like,
yeah, man.
Yeah, that's how I think of it. And as Pat Metheny said once, when he did something that he didn't like in a solo and he wanted to redo the thing, and he did drop the bit in, he said it just changed his life. He just went, and it worked out perfectly when he fixed it and he was happy. He went, I got to keep remembering it's a modern recording studio. If it is, use it.
Okay, good.
That's how I look at it.
Yep. That's answered the question.
That's me. I mean, I'm just not going to drag myself over the coals that it took me 2 hours to play, put together a well-developed solo. I'm just not going to agonize over it. But mostly, I mean, a lot of the times it'll be sort of a long solo might be in, say, 3 sections where it's mainly getting I just keep playing it over and over and recording things until I find something that's a good beginning to the solo.
Yep.
That's what I need the most, is a good beginning, because my style of playing is I'm not a lick-orientated player. If you go and get bunches of my recordings, you're not going to find licks that just keep occur. You hear them all the time. I don't play. I've always tried to avoid that mindset of playing.
Mm-hmm.
I've trained myself and practiced so that I'm more open to being reactive to the situation in the moment without a lot of preordained stuff. That's not to say that I don't have licks. I do. Everyone does.
True improviser. Yep.
Yeah, I want. Yeah, it's that's what I've set out to be my whole life was more that than even a session player. To be honest with you, was to be a good improviser. That's been my driving kind of force. So, I've forgotten what I was saying. It's been a long day. Yeah, but anyway, blah de blah. Yeah.
No, you've answered the question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
good.
Totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, you've recorded a bunch of albums for yourself, and you know, all about the drummers, onwards and sidewards.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch that I'm you know, I haven't got all the names of in front of me. Do you have anything new on the horizon? You're writing, recording.
Yeah, there's always. Yeah, I've just finished an album for a gal.
I mean for yourself.
For myself.
Yourself.
Oh yeah. In fact, that You've Gotta Love the Drummers was Volume 1, the one that you.
Volume 1, yeah.
Volume 2 is sitting there. I've been too busy. It's sitting there ready, and we're just Mike and I just trying to figure out how do we release it now. I mean, no one's got a CD player anymore for a start. You know, all that sort of stuff. We're just trying to figure out what to do. It's sitting there, and I've got other tracks already done for other things. So I'm kind of burbling. It's the cauldron's got the fire never goes out under the cauldron. There's always some sort of goop bubbling up, you know.
Yeah.
That's
great. Now, before I wind it out, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we missed?
Oh no, it's been easy talking with you about it all. That's
cool. You know, that's the idea.
You know, I've laid out the whole thing really in a way. You know, I prefer talking about the philosophical thing of it. What's your driving forces? What makes you want to play? And I mean, here's one that I like to say. I've realised that I fit into a category of musician where I've noticed it's just come to me in a more clarified way just over the last couple of months. There are a lot of people, and when I say this, whatever category anyone fits into, don't think it's right and wrong. It's just something I've noticed. There are a lot of players that are happy to play as long as their hands are moving across their instrument of choice and they're out with their mates, any given situation, they're happy to play.
Yep.
It fills them full of joy. I'm not one of those people, unfortunately, in a way.
Okay.
But, I'm one of those people that this is one of the reasons why I've stopped playing a lot, is when I do stuff, I'm just part of I'm a cog in the wheel of it all. It's the music that the band creates is what floats my boat, not whether I play well and I'm enjoying playing because my fingers are moving across the neck and I've got a good sound or whatever. That won't do it for me. It has to be the language between us and what music we're actually playing. Is it worthwhile? In my opinion, that is.
Yep.
It's got to do more with that than anything for me to have the desire to play.
Right.
Realise I mean, if I'm playing in something where it's not happening, I'd prefer to put the guitar down and go and order another drink, you know, and just watch from the bar.
Yeah.
You know, that'd be probably more fun for me, you know.
Yeah.
So I need to have in other words, I know what did this. It was the Crossfire Band. Set a stage for me a way to behave myself musically for all of my life.
Yeah.
Because that band rehearsed the crap out of what we did, and we all practiced like demons, and I've tried to do that all my life with everything that I've done.
Yeah. That's a hell of a bar that's been set there. Yeah. Try and chase that for the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's right. But that's what I've tried to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I was teaching. I had to feed my family because the music business kind of fell in a bit of a hole. It's in another kind of hole too now, as we know.
Yep.
But I've always been, I've got to feed the family. I've got to do that. But I kept doing stuff while I was teaching as well, making records, writing music, coming to Sydney and putting bands through the basement, et cetera, and so on, you know.
Yep. That's great. Jim Kelly, this has been Oh, hang on, I'll try that again. I'm trying to think of the right superlatives.
Oh, hang on. I've got some left over here.
Yeah.
Use them.
No, what I'm trying to say is it's been a real honour to talk to you and listen to you talk and hear your philosophies and shame we couldn't be face to face.
Yeah, man.
I'm sure we'll get there.
This is the best way if we can't be, but hopefully we will see each other one day, you know,
that's
and
right.
we can really take it up.
Yeah. So I wish you all the best. I wish you onwards and sidewards, as you said in one of your email sign-offs.
Yeah, that's right.
A while back. Yeah.
I borrowed that from Michael Palin, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
okay.
he said it, onwards and sideways, he said. I went, gee, that's funny. You know, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Great.
All right, Jim.
Stevie, thanks so much, man. And thank you for being a gracious interviewer and a fabulous listener. And every question you asked just seemed to naturally flow on. You know, it was a delight for the experience with you.
Oh, thank you, man. Appreciate that. Appreciate it. All right, take it easy, Jim. Have a good Christmas.
Okay.
And,
you too.
Love to all the family, mate. And just keep those snakes up there, mate.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
See you, Stevie.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.